The desert wind carried the faint sound of distant celebration as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her position on the rooftop overlooking the small Afghan village. Christmas Eve 2019 felt surreal in this place where sand met sky in endless waves of tan and gold. The temperature had dropped significantly since sunset, and her breath formed small clouds in the crisp night air. Maria had been deployed to this remote outpost for 8 months now, working as a combat medic with a joint special operations team. The unit consisted of 12 Navy SEALs, 2 Army Rangers, and herself, the only woman among the elite fighters. At 28, she had already served 3 tours of duty, but this mission felt different somehow. The intelligence reports had been scattered and contradictory for weeks. The village below them, Kala-i-Zaman, housed approximately 400 civilians who had been caught in the crossfire of territorial disputes between local warlords and Taliban forces. The team's mission was straightforward on paper: establish a temporary medical station, provide humanitarian aid, and gather intelligence about recent insurgent activities in the region. However, nothing about this deployment had proven straightforward. Lieutenant Commander Jake Mitchell, the team leader, crouched beside Maria as she monitored radio communications. His weathered face showed the strain of their situation. "Santos, what's the latest from base?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. Maria pressed her earpiece closer and frowned. "Still nothing, sir. Radio silence for the past 6 hours. Last transmission mentioned possible weather interference, but..." She paused, studying the clear star-filled sky above them. "There's no storm coming." The silence from their base camp, located 30 miles southeast, had everyone on edge. Standard protocol required hourly check-ins, especially during humanitarian missions in hostile territory. The fact that their communications had gone dark suggested either equipment failure or something far more serious. Mitchell nodded grimly and moved to brief the rest of the team. Maria watched as he gathered the SEALs in a tight circle near the building's edge. These men had become like brothers to her over the months. Despite initial skepticism about having a female medic attached to their unit, they had welcomed her after she proved herself during a fierce firefight in September where she had saved 3 lives under heavy enemy fire. Petty Officer Ryan "Doc" Williams approached her position. At 24, he was the youngest member of the team, but had already earned respect for his technical skills with communications equipment. "Santos, I've been trying to boost our signal strength, but something's actively jamming our frequencies," he reported, setting down his equipment pack. "Jamming?" Maria asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the desert temperature. "That's not random interference." "Exactly. Someone doesn't want us talking to anybody." Doc's expression was serious as he continued working on the radio equipment. "The pattern suggests military-grade jamming equipment. This isn't some local militia with basic gear." Maria felt her stomach tighten. The implications were clear. They were facing an organized enemy force with sophisticated capabilities. She looked down at the village where families were preparing for their own version of Christmas celebrations. Many of the villagers were Christian minorities who had fled from other regions, seeking safety in this remote location. Earlier that day, she had treated an elderly woman named Fatima who spoke broken English. The woman had clutched Maria's hand and whispered urgent warnings about new fighters who had arrived in the mountains 3 days ago. These weren't local Taliban, Fatima insisted. They spoke different languages and carried weapons she had never seen before. The medical station they had established in the village schoolhouse had been busy throughout the day. Maria and Doc had treated everything from infected wounds to malnutrition in children. The villagers were grateful but nervous, constantly glancing toward the mountain passes that surrounded their settlement. Even the children seemed unusually quiet, staying close to their parents instead of playing in the streets. As Maria packed her medical supplies for the night, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. 3 figures were making their way up the narrow path that led to their position. She immediately recognized Sergeant Mike "Tank" Thompson's massive silhouette, followed by 2 local interpreters who had been gathering information in the village. "Santos, Mitchell wants to see you," Tank said as he reached the rooftop. His usual jovial demeanor was replaced by concern. The interpreters brought some interesting news. Maria followed Tank to where Mitchell was questioning the 2 Afghan men. The older interpreter, A former teacher named Ahmad spoke rapidly in accented English while gesturing toward the northern mountains. He says the village children have been reporting strange sounds from the caves in the Jabal Saraj range. Mitchell translated for Maria's benefit. Heavy vehicles, helicopters landing at night, and lots of armed men speaking foreign languages. Ahmad nodded vigorously and added, "Not Taliban. These men, they have new weapons, night vision like yours. They ask questions about American soldiers in Valley." The younger interpreter, a man in his 20s named Rashid, pulled out a small object from his pocket. "I found this near the mountain trail today," he said, handing it to Mitchell. Maria leaned in to examine the item. It was a piece of advanced optical equipment, part of a high-tech scope or targeting system. The markings on it were not American, Russian, or Chinese. The manufacturing appeared European, possibly German or Swiss. "Sir," Maria said quietly, "whoever's up there has equipment that costs more than most countries' entire military budgets." Mitchell studied the device carefully. "Santos, I want you to prep for a possible medical emergency. If we're dealing with what I think we're dealing with, tonight might get very interesting." As if responding to his words, the distant sound of helicopter rotors began echoing through the mountain valleys. The sound was faint at first, but gradually growing louder. Maria counted at least 3 different aircraft, possibly more. The Christmas Eve that had started with hope and humanitarian purpose was rapidly transforming into something entirely different. Maria checked her medical kit one final time, ensuring she had maximum supplies of trauma dressings, blood clotting agents, and pain medication. Something deep in her gut told her that before dawn broke over the Afghan mountains, she would need every skill she had learned in 8 years of military medicine. The helicopters were getting closer, and their running lights had been extinguished. Whatever was coming their way was arriving under cover of darkness, and it wasn't bringing Christmas presents. Maria Santos had no way of knowing that in the next few hours, she would face the most challenging night of her military career, testing not only her medical skills, but her combat abilities in ways she had never imagined. The woman who had joined the army to save lives was about to discover that sometimes saving lives required taking them. The stage was set for a Christmas Eve that would be remembered not for peace on earth, but for the courage of one medic who refused to let evil triumph over innocence. The first explosion shattered the peaceful night at exactly 11:47 p.m. Maria felt the concussion wave before she heard the sound, a deep rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. The blast illuminated the northern mountain face in a brilliant orange flash that lasted only seconds but revealed the true scope of their situation. "Contact north," shouted Chief Petty Officer Marcus Steele Rodriguez as he peered through his night vision scope. Multiple vehicles, looks like a full assault force moving down the mountain pass. Maria's training kicked in immediately. She grabbed her medical bag and moved to the designated casualty collection point they had established near the building's stairwell. Through her own night vision equipment, she could see muzzle flashes erupting from at least 6 different positions along the ridgeline. The enemy wasn't just attacking their position, they were surrounding the entire village. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos as he coordinated their defense. "Santos, we've got wounded civilians in the village square. Tank and Doc provide covering fire while she moves to treat them." Without hesitation, Maria slung her medical pack across her shoulders and prepared to descend into what had become a war zone. The sound of automatic weapons fire was now constant, punctuated by the whistle and explosion of rocket-propelled grenades hitting buildings throughout the village. As she reached the ground level, the full horror of the situation became clear. The attackers weren't just targeting the American Special Operations Team. They were systematically destroying the village and terrorizing the civilian population. Maria could hear children screaming and women crying for help in multiple languages. The schoolhouse where they had established their medical station was already on fire. Maria sprinted toward the village center, staying low and using buildings for cover as bullets whined overhead. She could see several villagers lying motionless in the square, including children who had been caught in the open when the attack began. Her first patient was a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Shrapnel from an explosion had torn through his left arm, and he was losing blood rapidly. Maria immediately applied a tourniquet and pressure dressing while speaking to him in the few words of Dari she had learned. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure he could hear her over the gunfire. "I won't leave you." As she worked to stabilize the boy, movement caught her attention. 3 figures in advanced combat gear were moving systematically through the village, checking buildings and shooting any civilians they encountered. These weren't the typical insurgent fighters she had faced before. Their equipment was state-of-the-art, their movements precise and coordinated. Maria quickly realized that this wasn't a random attack or a battle for territorial control. This was an execution operation designed to eliminate witnesses, and her team had walked directly into it. She keyed her radio. "Actual, this is Santos. The enemy is conducting systematic elimination of civilians. This isn't about us. We just happen to be here." Mitchell's response crackled through heavy static. "Understood, Santos. We're taking heavy fire up here. Can you establish a secure treatment area in the mosque?" The village mosque, a simple stone building near the center of town, was one of the most solid structures in the area. Maria began moving her patients toward it, carrying the wounded boy while helping an elderly woman who had been injured by flying debris. The next few hours became a blur of medical emergency procedures under combat conditions. Maria found herself treating everything from gunshot wounds to severe burns while the battle raged around the village. She had managed to save 7 villagers, including 3 children, when the situation took a dramatic turn for the worse. At approximately 2:30 a.m., she heard Tank's voice over the radio, strained with pain. "Santos, we need immediate medical assistance on the roof. Steel's down, and Mitchell's bleeding out." Maria's heart pounded as she realized the implications. If Mitchell was critically wounded and Rodriguez was down, command of the unit would fall to the next ranking member, which might be her. She had cross-trained in tactical operations, but leading a special operations team in combat was far beyond her normal duties. She quickly organized the civilians she had been treating, leaving the most stable ones to care for the more seriously wounded. An old man named Hassan, who spoke excellent English, volunteered to coordinate the civilian medical care using basic first aid techniques Maria had taught him. "I was a doctor before the wars came," Hassan explained as Maria prepared to leave. "I can keep them alive until you return." The climb back to the rooftop position felt like ascending into hell itself. The stairwell was filled with smoke from fires burning throughout the village, and the sound of gunfire was deafening. When Maria finally reached the top, she found a scene that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Chief Rodriguez was unconscious but breathing, with what appeared to be a severe concussion from a close grenade blast. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell was conscious but had taken a sniper's bullet through his left shoulder that had nicked a major artery. Blood was pooling beneath him despite the pressure bandages Doc Williams had applied. "Santos," Mitchell gasped as she knelt beside him. "The enemy has advanced positions on 3 sides. We're almost out of ammunition, and they're preparing for a final assault." Maria immediately went to work on Mitchell's wound, using emergency surgical techniques to control the bleeding. As she worked, she counted the remaining team members. Of the original 12 SEALs, only 6 were still combat effective. Doc Williams was treating 2 others with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. The most shocking revelation came when Petty Officer Sam "Ghost" Patterson returned from a reconnaissance mission to the southern perimeter. "Ma'am," he reported, addressing Maria since she was now the senior medic and Mitchell was incapacitated. "The enemy has completely surrounded us. I count at least 40 hostiles with military-grade equipment. But here's the weird part. I recognize some of their gear from intelligence briefings. These guys aren't Taliban or even foreign military." Maria looked up from Mitchell's wound. "What do you mean?" "They're mercenaries, ma'am. Professional soldiers for hire. The kind that governments use when they want plausible deniability. Someone paid a lot of money to make this village disappear, and they definitely didn't expect to find us here." The implications hit Maria like a physical blow. This wasn't a military operation or a terrorist attack. It was a contract killing on a massive scale. Someone wanted the entire village eliminated, probably because the residents had witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. As dawn approached, Maria found herself in a position she had never imagined. With Mitchell unconscious from blood loss and Rodriguez still unresponsive, tactical command was falling to her. The remaining SEALs looked to her for leadership, and, below them, dozens of innocent civilians depended on their protection. The enemy forces were preparing for what appeared to be a final assault, and their ammunition was running critically low. It was then that Maria noticed something that would change everything: the advanced weapons systems that the mercenaries had left behind when they retreated to regroup. Among the abandoned equipment were 2 state-of-the-art sniper rifles with advanced targeting systems, and what appeared to be a portable missile launcher with several remaining rounds. Maria Santos, the combat medic who had joined the military to save lives, was about to make a decision that would transform her from healer into hunter. The Christmas Eve massacre was far from over, and the most dangerous phase was just beginning. The Bloodied medic was about to seize weapons she had never been trained to use, and turn them against an enemy that had shown no mercy to the innocent. What happened next would either save the village or doom them all. The pre-dawn darkness was broken by the distant rumble of approaching vehicles. Maria could see their headlights cutting through the mountain mist like predatory eyes. The mercenary force was regrouping for what would likely be their final assault on the village, and she knew that her team's conventional defensive position wouldn't hold against such overwhelming numbers. As she knelt beside the captured enemy weapons, Maria's mind raced through possibilities. Her medical training had taught her to think systematically under pressure, to assess resources, and prioritize actions based on the greatest potential for saving lives. Now, paradoxically, those same skills were leading her toward a very different kind of intervention. The advanced sniper rifle was a weapon she had only seen in intelligence briefings. A German-made precision instrument capable of accurate shots at distances exceeding a mile. The targeting system incorporated thermal imaging and wind compensation technology that made it deadly in the hands of someone with even basic marksmanship skills. Maria had qualified expert with the M4 carbine during basic training and had maintained her shooting proficiency throughout her military career. But this weapon was in an entirely different class. As she examined the scope's controls, Doc Williams crawled over to her position. "Santos, that's a Blazer R93 tactical rifle," he whispered, his voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. "I trained on something similar during an advanced course last year. The scope does most of the work. You just need to paint the target and squeeze the trigger." Maria looked up at the young petty officer. Blood was trickling from a cut on his forehead, and his left arm was in an improvised sling, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Doc, I need you to help me understand this targeting system. How many vehicles can you count?" Williams pulled out a small pair of binoculars and studied the approaching force. "8 vehicles, ma'am. 6 trucks loaded with personnel, plus 2 that look like command vehicles. They're moving in a standard assault formation, staying spread out to minimize casualties from explosions." Maria nodded, her mind shifting into a tactical mode she had never experienced before. The mercenaries were professionals, but they were also overconfident. They had overwhelming numbers and superior firepower, which meant they weren't expecting sophisticated resistance from what they assumed was a small special operations team. "Williams, can you operate that missile launcher while I handle the rifle?" Doc's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's a javelin system. Fire and forget. I just need to lock onto a target, and the missile does the rest." The plan forming in Maria's mind was audacious and desperate, but it was their only hope. The enemy force was approaching from the north along a narrow mountain road with steep cliffs on both sides. If she could target the lead and rear vehicles simultaneously, the convoy would be trapped in the killing zone with nowhere to maneuver. Maria positioned herself behind the captured sniper rifle and began adjusting the scope settings. The thermal imaging revealed the enemy positions with startling clarity. She could see individual soldiers in the truck beds, the drivers behind their steering wheels, even the commanders studying maps in the lead vehicle. Her first target had to be perfect. Maria selected the driver of the lead command vehicle, a shot of approximately 800 meters through her current position. The advanced targeting system painted a green reticle over her chosen target and began calculating for wind speed, distance, and even the rotation of the Earth. "Doc, can you get a lock on the rear vehicle with that javelin?" "Already locked, ma'am. Waiting for your signal." Maria took a deep breath and settled into the shooting position. Everything she had learned about saving lives was about to be turned inside out. Her steady hands, trained to perform delicate medical procedures under pressure, were now preparing to take lives to save other lives. The convoy was moving at approximately 30 miles per hour along the mountain road. Maria could see the confidence in their movement. They expected this to be a simple cleanup operation. She thought about the children in the mosque below, about Hassan and the other villagers who were counting on her to protect them. "On my mark," she whispered into her radio. 3, 2, 1, execute. Maria squeezed the trigger just as Doc fired the javelin missile. The sniper rifle's recoil was surprisingly gentle, but through the scope she watched the .338 Lapua Magnum round travel its trajectory with deadly precision. The lead vehicle's driver slumped forward, and the truck veered sharply to the right before crashing into the rocky mountainside. Simultaneously, the javelin missile arced high into the air before diving down onto the rear command vehicle. The explosion was devastating, completely destroying the vehicle and sending debris flying in all directions. The convoy was now trapped exactly as Maria had planned. The narrow road was blocked at both ends, and the remaining 6 vehicles were packed together with nowhere to go. Panic spread through the mercenary ranks as they realized they had driven into an expertly planned ambush. But Maria wasn't finished. She quickly acquired her second target, the communications specialist she could see frantically working with radio equipment in one of the middle trucks. The second shot was even more precise than the first, eliminating the enemy's ability to call for reinforcements. "Outstanding shooting, Santos," came Ghost Patterson's voice over the radio. "The enemy is in complete disarray down there." Maria was already searching for her next target when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through the thermal scope, she could see movement in the village below. A second group of mercenaries had infiltrated from the eastern approach, while everyone was focused on the main convoy. These soldiers were moving directly toward the mosque, where she had left the wounded civilians. "Doc, we've got enemy forces in the village," Maria shouted as she swung the rifle toward this new threat. "They're heading for the mosque." The situation had just become exponentially more complex. Maria now faced a choice that would define the rest of the night: continue engaging the trapped convoy from her elevated position, or abandon the strategic advantage to move closer and protect the civilians directly. Through her scope, she could see the lead infiltrator approaching the mosque entrance. Hassan and the other villagers were completely defenseless against these armed professionals. Maria realized that her medical oath to first do no harm was about to be tested in ways no medical school had ever prepared her for. The decision came down to mathematics and morality. From her current position, she could systematically eliminate the trapped convoy members, but the villagers would likely be massacred before she could affect the situation in the mosque. If she moved to a position where she could protect the civilians, the convoy forces would eventually organize and overwhelm their position. Maria made her choice with the same decisive clarity she brought to medical emergencies. She grabbed the rifle and began moving toward a position that would give her line of sight on the mosque, even though it meant abandoning the tactical advantage they had worked so hard to achieve. "Doc, tank, hold this position and keep pressure on the convoy. I'm moving to protect the civilians." "Santos, that's suicide." Tank's voice crackled over the radio. "You can't take on 8 hostiles by yourself." Maria was already moving, carrying the advanced rifle and as much ammunition as she could manage. "Maybe not," she replied. "But I didn't become a medic to watch children die while I had the power to stop it." The bloodied medic was about to discover that sometimes the greatest act of healing requires the most precise application of violence. Christmas Eve was far from over, and the most dangerous part of her journey was just beginning. Maria reached the new position just as the first mercenary kicked open the mosque's main door. Through her scope, she could see Hassan trying to shield 3 children behind the prayer altar while the elderly man shouted desperately in broken English, "No military here. Only wounded people." The mercenary's response was to raise his automatic weapon toward the defenseless group. Maria didn't hesitate. The rifle's advanced targeting system locked onto the threat instantly, and her shot took the mercenary down before he could fire. The specialized ammunition punched through his body armor like it was paper, dropping him in the doorway. But her shot had revealed her position to the remaining 7 infiltrators. Muzzle flashes immediately erupted from multiple points around the village as the enemy soldiers sought cover and began returning fire toward her location. Maria found herself in a deadly game of cat and mouse through the narrow streets and buildings of Kali Zaman. The mercenaries were professionals who understood urban combat tactics, but they were operating in unfamiliar territory against an opponent who knew every alley and hiding spot from months of medical work in the village. Her second target appeared as she moved between buildings. A mercenary was attempting to flank her position by climbing onto a rooftop 2 blocks away. Maria's shot caught him mid-climb, and he tumbled backward into the street below. The psychological effect of her precision shooting was becoming apparent among the enemy forces. These were soldiers accustomed to intimidating poorly equipped local militias, not facing off against someone with access to their own advanced weapons and the skills to use them effectively. Maria's radio crackled with updates from her team on the rooftop. "Santos, the convoy forces are trying to organize a breakout," reported Tank Thompson. "We're keeping them suppressed, but we're down to our last magazines. Hold your position as long as you can," Maria replied while moving to her next shooting position. "I'm working on the infiltrators." What happened next would become legend among special operations forces for years to come. Maria began implementing what military strategists would later call precision terror, systematically hunting the mercenaries through the village using their own advanced equipment against them. Her third shot eliminated a mercenary who was attempting to set up a machine gun position that would have dominated the mosque courtyard. The fourth took down an enemy sniper who had climbed the village's water tower. Each shot was calculated not just for maximum tactical effect, but to create psychological pressure on the remaining forces. The mercenaries began making critical mistakes as panic set in. They started bunching up for mutual support instead of maintaining proper spacing, making themselves easier targets. They also began firing wildly at suspected positions rather than taking careful aim, wasting ammunition, and revealing their locations. Maria's medical training proved unexpectedly valuable in this deadly scenario. Her understanding of human anatomy meant that each shot was precisely placed for maximum stopping power. Her experience staying calm under pressure during medical emergencies translated perfectly to maintaining accuracy while under fire. By the time the Eastern Infiltration Force was reduced to 3 surviving members, they made a fatal tactical error. Instead of retreating to regroup, they decided to rush the mosque in a coordinated assault, hoping to reach the hostages before Maria could stop them. Maria was waiting. She had anticipated this move and positioned herself in the village schoolhouse ruins with a clear field of fire covering all approaches to the mosque. When the 3 mercenaries broke from cover simultaneously, Maria demonstrated why she had earned expert marksmanship ratings throughout her military career. 3 shots, 3 seconds, 3 targets down. The Eastern Infiltration Force had been completely eliminated. But Maria's success came at a cost. Her prolonged engagement with the village infiltrators had given the convoy forces time to organize their own breakout attempt. Through her radio, she could hear the intensity of the firefight on the rooftop increasing dramatically. "Santos," came Doc Williams' urgent voice. "The convoy forces have organized into assault teams. They're coming up the building from 3 different directions." Maria grabbed her remaining ammunition and began the dangerous journey back toward her team's position. As she moved through the village streets, she could see the tactical situation developing on the mountainside. The mercenaries had divided into smaller units and were using covering fire and movement to advance toward the building where her teammates were trapped. It was then that Maria noticed something that would change the entire dynamic of the battle: the abandoned Javelin missile launcher that Doc had used earlier. The system still had 2 missiles remaining, and it was perfectly positioned to engage targets on the mountainside. But using the Javelin effectively would require her to expose herself in an open position where the enemy forces could target her. It was an enormous risk, but Maria realized it was their only hope of evening the odds. As she reached the launcher position, Maria could see that the convoy forces had advanced much closer than she had realized. They were now less than 200 meters from her team's building and moving in coordinated fire teams that suggested professional military training. Maria quickly familiarized herself with the Javelin's controls. The system was designed to be operator-friendly, but she had never fired one before. The targeting computer required her to paint the target with a laser designator and maintain the lock for several seconds while the missile's guidance system initialized. Her first target was a group of 6 mercenaries who had taken cover behind a large boulder and were providing covering fire for advancing assault teams. Maria locked onto their position and fired. The missile arced high into the air before diving down with devastating precision. The explosion eliminated the entire fire team and sent a clear message to the remaining forces. The second missile she saved for the mercenaries' most dangerous threat, a heavy machine gun team that had established a position commanding the approaches to her team's building. This shot required even more precision because the enemy position was closer to friendly forces. Maria held her breath as she maintained the laser lock on the machine gun position. The missile's flight path carried it directly into the target area, eliminating the heavy weapons team and creating a gap in the enemy's assault formation. The psychological impact of the precise missile strikes was immediate and decisive. The remaining convoy forces began falling back toward their disabled vehicles, their coordinated assault dissolving into a disorganized retreat. Maria keyed her radio with hands that were finally beginning to shake from exhaustion and adrenaline. This is Santos. Eastern infiltrators eliminated, convoy forces in retreat. What's your status up there? Mitchell's weak voice came back over the radio. Santos, that was the most incredible display of marksmanship and tactics I've ever witnessed. You just saved all our lives. But Maria knew the night wasn't over yet. Dawn was breaking over the Afghan mountains, and with daylight would come the possibility of enemy reinforcements, helicopter support, or simply a renewed assault by the surviving mercenary forces. The bloodied medic had proven herself as a warrior, but the final test was still approaching. Christmas Day was about to dawn over a village that had been saved by a woman who understood that sometimes the most powerful medicine is delivered at the point of a bullet. As the first rays of sunlight painted the Afghan mountains in shades of gold and pink, Maria Santos stood among the ruins of what had been a peaceful village just 12 hours earlier. The acrid smell of smoke and cordite hung in the air, mixing with the desert wind that carried the distant sound of helicopters. But these were friendly aircraft, finally, responding to the emergency beacon that Doc Williams had managed to activate. The battle was over, but the cost had been enormous. Maria moved through the village streets, switching back from warrior to medic as she assessed the damage and continued treating wounded civilians. Hassan, the elderly former doctor, had done remarkably well caring for the injured in the mosque, but several villagers required immediate surgical attention that only a fully equipped medical facility could provide. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell had regained consciousness as Maria worked to stabilize him for evacuation. Despite his serious wounds, he insisted on conducting a debrief while medical helicopters were en route. Santos, he said, his voice still weak but determined, I need to understand exactly what we walked into here. This wasn't a random attack. Maria had been thinking about the same question throughout the long night. As she recounted the events and her observations about the mercenaries' equipment and tactics, a disturbing picture emerged. The precision of the attack, the systematic elimination of civilians, and the advanced weaponry all pointed to a contracted operation designed to eliminate witnesses to something significant. The answer came from Ahmad, the village interpreter, who had survived the night by hiding in a basement cellar. When the evacuation helicopters arrived, he approached Maria with information that explained everything. The new men in the mountains, Ahmad said urgently, they were not fighting Taliban. They were protecting something. 3 days ago, helicopters brought many boxes to caves. The children who saw them, they were the first ones killed last night. Maria felt the pieces clicking into place. The village hadn't been targeted because of her team's presence. They had simply had the misfortune to establish their humanitarian mission in a location where civilians had witnessed a smuggling operation. The mercenaries had been hired to eliminate any potential witnesses to whatever was being moved through those mountain caves. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez had regained consciousness and was insisting on participating in the debrief despite his concussion. Ma'am, he addressed Maria, using the respectful term that acknowledged her de facto command during the crisis. If this was a witness elimination operation, then there are probably other villages in the region that are also at risk. Maria realized that their ordeal might not be an isolated incident. If a criminal organization was using these mountains for smuggling operations, they would likely target any civilian populations that might compromise their security. The medical evacuation proceeded efficiently once the helicopters arrived. Maria worked alongside the flight medics to stabilize the most seriously wounded villagers for transport to the military hospital at Bagram Air Base. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell and Chief Rodriguez required immediate surgery, but both were expected to make full recoveries. As the last helicopter lifted off with wounded civilians, Maria found herself alone with Doc Williams and the remaining team members, conducting a final sweep of the village to ensure no one had been missed. The sight of the destruction was overwhelming. Buildings reduced to rubble, personal belongings scattered in the streets, and the constant reminder of how quickly violence can shatter peaceful lives. Doc Williams approached her as she stood in the ruins of the schoolhouse that had served as their medical station. "Santos, I've been thinking about what happened here. What you did last night. That wasn't just good shooting or good tactics. She had coordinated tactical operations under combat conditions while simultaneously providing medical care to wounded civilians. She had transformed from a combat medic into an improvised special operations commander, all while maintaining her primary focus on saving lives." The intelligence reports that followed would reveal that Maria's team had stumbled into a sophisticated operation involving the smuggling of weapons and possibly chemical materials through the mountain passes. The mercenary force they had defeated was part of an international criminal organization with connections to terrorist networks and corrupt government officials in multiple countries. But for Maria, the most important outcome was simpler and more personal. Every civilian they had treated in the village mosque had survived. Hassan and his family were safely relocated to a secure refugee camp. The children who had hidden in terror throughout the night would grow up to live full lives because one medic had refused to let evil triumph over innocence. 3 weeks later, at a ceremony at Bagram Air Base, Maria Santos received the Silver Star for valor in action against an armed enemy. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, speaking from his hospital bed via video link, told the assembled officers and media representatives that he had witnessed the most remarkable display of courage, tactical thinking, and dedication to protecting innocent life in his 15 years of special operations experience. But Maria's own thoughts during the ceremony were focused on a different kind of recognition. That morning, she had received a letter forwarded through military channels from Hassan, the elderly former doctor who had helped save lives in the mosque. Written in careful English, the letter simply said, "Thank you for showing us that there are still people in this world who will risk everything to protect those who cannot protect themselves. You gave us the greatest gift possible, hope for our children's future." Maria Santos returned to active duty with a new understanding of her role in the military. She remained a combat medic, but her experience on Christmas Eve had shown her that healing and fighting sometimes required the same skills, the same courage, and the same commitment to protecting life against those who would destroy it. The woman who had been bloodied on Christmas Eve, who had seized the enemy's own weapons and turned them against evil with deadly precision, had learned that sometimes the most powerful medicine is delivered not with gentle hands, but with unwavering resolve and perfect aim. The village of Kali Izaman was rebuilt with international aid funding, and today it houses a small medical clinic named the Santos Health Center. But the most lasting memorial to that Christmas Eve is not a building or a plaque. It's the dozens of children who are alive today because one medic understood that saving lives sometimes requires taking them, and that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Maria Santos never spoke publicly about the details of that night, but her actions became legend among special operations forces worldwide. In the most challenging circumstances imaginable, she had proven that the human capacity for good can overcome any evil, no matter how well-armed or well-organized. Christmas had come to the Afghan mountains in the most unexpected way, not with peace on earth, but with the fierce protection of innocence by someone who refused to let darkness win.